Joining us now to discuss is Mark Kasten, who specializes in white-collar crime at law firm Buchanan Ingersoll Rooney. Mark, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. So, a not guilty plea from Sam Bankman-Fried, as was widely expected. Your reaction?
Hi, Christine. Thanks for having me. My reaction is that this was, as you said, entirely expected. It would be very surprising to see anything but a not guilty plea at this point, unless, of course, Bankman-Fried had a pre-existing deal with prosecutors, which all signs point to him not having now. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that a guilty plea might not be in the works. It's likely, in fact, that his lawyers are talking to the government, but for now, he's pled not guilty to these 8 counts here. The government appears pretty confident in its case, but trials take time, they take resources, and despite the government's feelings about the strength of its case, there's always some risk to the government at trial. There's a very small percentage of criminal cases in the United States actually go to trial, and so it's likely that as the weeks and months progress, Bankman-Fried's lawyers are going to talk to the government, and a deal might eventually take shape.
Interesting. Does he have a case? I mean, he has his former associates, his inner circle, Caroline Ellison, who's the CEO of Alameda Research, his prop trading firm that he co-founded, as well as Gary Wang, also one of his co-founders at FTX. They both pleaded guilty. Seems like they have a deal with the Department of Justice.
They do.
Does he have a chance?
It's certainly a very tough road for Bankman-Fried to hoe, especially with 2 of his closest associates, as you indicated, pleading guilty, and all signs pointing to them participating in the prosecution and testifying against Bankman-Fried at trial if necessary. Part of the deals that both of the co-defendants struck with the government include that if they provide substantial cooperation to the government, prosecutors will make what's called a 5K motion, which asks the judge to depart from the sentencing guidelines and give a more lenient sentence both to Gary Wang and Catherine Ellison. So they have every incentive to help the government. They have every incentive to testify against Bankman-Fried at trial, and they're likely to do that. So you're right. It as you indicated, it is going to be a very tough task for Bankman-Fried to ultimately prevail at trial, especially because it's likely his defense is going to be exactly what he's been previewing in all of his public statements over the past month plus, that he did not intend to defraud FTX's customers or lenders or investors. And in fact, he was just out of his depth. He was new at this. It was an immature company in a developing industry, and he didn't mean to actually violate any of the laws that he ultimately did. Ellison and Wang's testimony.
Is that a plausible defense?
It's a very difficult defense, especially because ignorance of the law is a difficult defense and is not commonly successful. And it's even more difficult when Ellison and Wang are likely to testify at his trial, and they're the ones that ultimately can say, yes, I had this conversation with Bankman-Fried. Yes, he knew this. We exchanged this information. That is really going to undermine any kind of intent defense that Bankman-Fried tries to use.
I don't know if you gathered anything from his countenance in court, or, the fact that he's pleading not guilty. Is that bad for sentencing? I mean, he's going to be dragging this through the criminal justice system. The judge may not like that when he has a case strongly against him, given that his former associates are testifying against him.
Christine, there's no doubt that defendants in the United States experience a trial penalty. If you take a case to trial instead of resolving it with the government, you are almost certainly going to risk leniency from the judge, and you are almost certainly going to end up with a more severe sentence than you would have had you ultimately resolved the matter with the government. Now, all that being said, this is not the time necessarily for him to enter a guilty plea, and him entering a not guilty plea to these 8 charges today is not hurting him at this point. Because as I mentioned before, it's likely that his lawyers and the government will continue to work toward a resolution if they haven't started that work already. And he's going to, hopefully for him, enjoy some leniency from Judge Kaplan if this gets resolved, whether it's a month from now or 6 months from now or 10 months from now even. Avoiding trial and saving the government its expending those resources is an argument he can use at sentencing to try to get some leniency from the court.
Do we know anything about Judge Kaplan? Is he a favorable judge? I understand that usually judges are prosecutors, and he formerly worked for defense in his previous role.
So Judge Kaplan, what I can say about him is he's certainly no stranger to high-profile cases, but he is not particularly, in my experience, he's not particularly a good draw. However, he did accept the apparent deal that the government cut with Bankman-Fried with respect to the terms of his supervised release, which a lot of folks thought was a pretty favorable deal for Bankman-Fried on that bail, the $250,000 bail. And the court accepted that. So that's a fair sign for him.
And we also learned that the cosigners of that deal have asked that their names be redacted from public documents. Mm-hmm. Is that pretty usual? They have a good case for that. They're concerned about their personal safety.
So that's a really interesting point. It's not typical to see that, but in this case, it's not surprising because counsel has made a case to the judge that Bankman-Fried's parents fear for their safety, that they've received threats. And it's reasonable for them to argue, as they have, that the cosigners for the bond are going to have threats to their safety if their identities are revealed. So to answer your question more directly, it's not common, but I'm not surprised that argument was advanced in this case.
So lawyers anticipate that this will be a 2 to 4 week trial, according to Mark Cohen, Sam Bankman-Fried's mm-hmm. lawyer and prosecution. Does that sound about right?
That's in range, but these things, and that could grow or shrink as evidence is developed over the next 10 months. It strikes me as rather short. As prosecutors come to understand their case better, they may seek more time. I'll remind you that this came together very quickly in light of how long it typically takes to build these complicated white-collar fraud cases. The time between the fall of FTX and the indictment of Bankman-Fried, it was less than 2 months. I mean, that's lightning speed for federal prosecutors to do something like this. Now, I'm sure they've gathered a lot of information in that period. They've gotten cooperation from Ellison and Wong, so they have a lot of evidence. But as they build their case, that might grow. 2 weeks would be extraordinarily short for this trial, I believe, and it could go beyond 4.
Your forecast on the likelihood of trial?
I would be somewhat surprised to see this go to trial simply because of the extent of the cooperation involved. I mean, the 2 people that worked closely with Bankman-Fried are cooperating with the government. They have every incentive to give the government what they need at this point. And if Bankman-Fried's argument is going to be that he frankly didn't know what he was doing, they really could be, Ellison and Wong could really provide the headshot for the government.